Welcome to Team Five's presentation. Our team's project was obviously to assemble a team and create an instructive ebook, and we did that on making your grandma's Southern pound cake. When we started, we had 4 team members. Those were Luana Brown Kyle as our project manager, Lee Radney was time manager, David Zimmerman was our quality and risk manager, and Josh Wolf was our communication manager. Now, that was as we began, and shortly after this, in fact, just after developing our team contract, we began to notice Josh wasn't making meetings and was not responding to anything we had sent his way. So we reached out and we followed, fortunately, the procedure of the team contract that all 4 of us had been involved in. And with the criteria in that team contract, he still did not respond, and unfortunately, we had to make the decision to exclude him from the remainder of the project. And we were thankful we had that team contract to utilize to make those decisions. So once we made that decision as a team, we reached out to Dr. Wright and asked him to be removed. And once we did that, then we had to apply that work to other folks. And but it was easier to do that than it was to keep trying to draw someone in who was unfortunately being unresponsive. So our life cycle of this project was 16 weeks, and we have now completed the ebook, and it's delivered to our stakeholder for their initial review at this point. So framing the project with the course material, there were steps along the way from both the planning stages to the execution stages of things we needed to get in place in order to have a successful project planning, execution, and implementation. And it came with each of those tools relevant to that. Our professor did a great job of outlining how we needed to utilize those tools through each of those phases and what each of those purposes of those tools was. And the greatest part of this, in my opinion, beyond the guidance of doing the project, was the example documents that we were provided throughout the course. And anytime we kind of had a little bit of a blur between asking questions of our professor of one another and referencing these example documents, that generally cleared it up right away. And these were used much like an after action report for a project. You know, we were able to go have a look at those, compare to our thoughts, make any modifications that we had in understanding, and then apply those documents. And once we saw these examples, that generally just cleared it up easily. The other thing that was invaluable was the meetings that we had with Dr. Wright. It allowed us communication with her. It allowed us question and answer time. And she also gave us updates on the project, where we should be, looking at the timeline and where we should be heading. So what should we be working on now, what we should be looking at in the future, and just general guidance of planning the project, because the goal here was as much the project itself as understanding how to plan for that project. So we had some early on lesson learned. You know, we realized everyone's got to be committed from the get-go, and a lack of commitment by one team member even increases the workload for the whole team. And that workload initially was trying to bring our missing team member back into the fold, that especially taken on by our project manager Luana, because she spent a lot of time reaching out at, and we all did, but she specifically did. And once we determined that that was not going to be, we had to make the decision to move on without him, and that helped at least understand where we needed to go from that point. And that increased workload did jeopardize the quality deliverable, and unfortunately losing a team member, but fortunately having some very driven remaining team members helped us make that. And we were able to shift that without any repercussions, I think, to our project. Communications is absolutely key. The Blackboard sessions that we had weekly as a team were utilized well. the group me communications and the text messages that we exchanged throughout the week were very integral to our success as well, because anytime one of us wasn't quite sure of the pathway we were taking, we would key off one another, and again, particularly our project manager, and she was checking in with us, and we were checking in with one another throughout the planning and execution stages. And that planning is certainly key. Even a project as seemingly simple as creating an ebook for baking a pound cake has a lot of steps, a lot of things that have to be considered, and you have to do the front part, which is the plan, before you can get into the execution side. Plan for the unexpected. Who would have ever thought, and we listed this in our risk template, but who would have ever thought that we'd find ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic during a project? And that's why that contingency part of the project is so important. We used the budget resources, we used the communication plan, the quality management template, the planning template, the work breakdown structure, and we divided those tasks out, but we built in contingency and even listed this global pandemic that we found ourselves in as a possibility early on. Honestly, only thinking then that it was I think we maybe listed as a medium risk, and turned out it was a high risk. Even as far as going to get the items to bake a cake for taking some of the pictures for our project, it took a couple of trips to find butter. So supplies can be an issue depending on what's going on. So that's why you got to plan for the unexpected. So if you're building a house and there's inclement weather that does a lot of damage around you, you may have trouble finding materials for a short period, just as we had trouble finding materials due to the stocking of different things around here. So you just got to plan for anything that can, fairly reasonably happen. And that pandemic was on our radar, so we did take that into account. Even though there were hiccups, you got to stick to the plan. Nobody was in a panic, as we were going along, going, what if we can't find this? What if we can't find that? We had a plan. We stuck to it. We adjusted to what was going on, and didn't let it take us completely off course. We stayed focused. We kept our goals. We kept our deliverables to our client in mind, and we carried on. Again, that communication is essential. We use things like Blackboard, as I mentioned, every week to have major meetings, to kind of review documents, to kind of get our heads together and make sure we're headed down the same path. The ability to talk out loud and verbalize things was a very good part of using that. Google Docs for exchanging documents worked out great. The Group Me, because it's so multi-platform, it didn't matter if it was iOS or Android or your phone or your tablet or your computer, Group Me was there, and we love that. And of course, text is always a good way as well. But each one brought a different capability. We used Remember the Milk for task deadlines. We used Google Calendar for our meetings, and just took on all of these different tools that we had to make this project successful. And the thing we learned is there is no one thing that fits all. You have to have various tools in your toolbox, just like a mechanic has wrenches and pliers and screwdrivers and things like that. There is no one single tool for project management. There's multiple tools that are used for the needs of the team members, and we found that out and had some great tools presented to us, and we're given choices for those tools, and that way we could work with things that we felt would be the most benefit to our project. Not many recommendations. We kind of all had some similar thoughts here, but most of our sessions, I think, as far as with Dr. Wright, were pretty much made for each stage of the plan. They did get it 45 minutes or longer in some cases, not much more than that. And I think the sessions were planned to be 30 minutes, and I suspect the Q&A is what generally took us over that. And of course, everybody being new to Blackboard, there's a lot of dead air. Wish those things that like that. Wish we could be down to a 30-minute session. That would be a little more relaxed, trying to take in so much information. But again, they are designed for the different stages of the plan, so I'm not real sure how effective it could be in bringing that 30 minutes. But if we could, that was one recommendation. The only thing we really didn't see an example of was the final presentation itself. We had good examples of ebooks, good examples of all the other documents that were mentioned, but not particularly one for the final presentation. Of course, this presentation is supposed to be our presentation, and perhaps that's why, but just trying to get a good idea of what that would entail would be helpful. Of course, Dr. Wright did a great job of breaking that down in our meeting, but seeing it unfold and having a reference document, we were kind of spoiled throughout the rest of the course, so we kind of got used to that. So that was the only thing we saw that was missing, and that's the only other recommendation we might have is could future classes have a sample of PM presentations, so project management presentations. So overall, great course. The thing we learned is no matter how large or small the project is, you got to plan it, and you got to have everything in place for that plan. You got to build in that contingency. You got to have risk. You got to have budgets. You got to understand what the deliverables are. You got to stay in touch with your stakeholders, and that's what ultimately will make a successful project for all, for both your customer expectations and as far as carrying that out on your end. So great course, enjoyed every minute of it, and that's our presentation.